Let's set up some handrails. I'm in here. These Addington units are almost finished, and the last job I've got to do is handrails. Earlier in the week I did the other 3 units. The first one took me almost a day to figure out. The second and third ones combined took me just over a day, and hopefully I can knock this one out in about 4 hours. Working on a Saturday, I don't really want to hang around. Also, I'll point out what happened here. So equipment wise, you want a drop saw or mitre saw. You can use a circular saw. I'll get into that at the end. You want a drill and an impact driver onto level, at least 900 longs, and some painter's tape. If you have someone to help you, you can use a chalk line to mark this out. Just make sure if you're installing your brackets on a finished surface, you use blue chalk. Since I'm working by myself, I'm going to use my levels for this, and some clamps will really make it easier. In this case, I'm using 45mm dowel. And to fix that dowel together, you want PVA and some screws. I tried that CA glue for this, but it's not quite strong enough. You want a good quality filler and some reasonably fine grip sandpaper. You should also get yourself an angle finder of some kind. I'm using a good rule, and I'll show you the trick on getting the angle from that. For setup, ideally you'd start a few months earlier and get your blocking in at the right height. I took over this job around about a month before the lining went on. There was blocking in the stairwells already, but I didn't check it. I feel a little bit responsible for that because it's too low. So I'm gonna have to fix my brackets into studs, which is fine, but it just takes a little bit longer, and it means that your brackets aren't as evenly spaced. The top of my handrail needs to be at between 900mm and 1 metre. So what I've done is, I've taken my 1200 level, and I've marked 900 up on there. All you need to do is mark from the nosing at each end of that run, and then mark a line at that height. Now you need to make sure that you make your marks at the nosing and vertical, because otherwise your heights will be off. If you've got a staircase where you've got one clean run, it's really easy to mark out. All you need to do is mark the bottom and the top and get your chalk line if you've got a spare set of hands. If you don't, just mark another one and it'll be pretty close, and you can always adjust it. I do want to mark out roughly this back wall. You can't mark it out completely until you've got these two up. I'll show you why when I get to that. But I just want to check that this height and the bottom height does in fact still work with us. This one's a little bit tricky because the nosing for this run is here and the nosing for the next step is here. So you can sort of see my dilemma here, where it's going to work at the bottom, but it's not going to work at the top. So what I'll have to do, I think, is lower it slightly and change the pitch so it meets up somewhere over here. And I can probably raise this one a bit too. Now I can start putting the brackets on. If you've got your blocking at the right height, you can just measure in from the ends and get them, and as long as your centers aren't too far apart, you're okay. But in this case, I need to find a stud, and that's what's going to define where I put my brackets. To define my studs or my blocking, I'm using this. I don't recommend it though. The reviews for it were fantastic. Maybe I got a dud, but I get intermittent success with it. So I use a combination of this and the old thumping on the wall. It's telling me there's a stud here. Ideally I'd like a bracket over probably here. See, that doesn't sound like a stud there. It sounds like a stud there though. So this is the part where a self-centering drill bit pays for itself. Each of these brackets comes with 5 screws, but only 3 are for fixing to the wall. I figure if you can get 2 in the top and 1 in the bottom half, that's okay. I guess they just have 5 holes provided, so you've got a little bit of wiggle room. Well, it's probably a double stud right at the end, it should be. So you've got 10mm of jib and then 2 sticks at 45mm. Because that's the bottom of my handrail, I want to put these brackets down a bit. And to get the bottom of the handrail, you see there's a little curve in that bracket where the timber sits. This is a little bit fiddly because you've got to remember to adjust down the stud, but you also want to get the right height and the right angle. Chuck the other bracket on, and then I'll cut timber for this and do the top. this piece right at the bottom, I like to just run it long at both ends, and that means that I can cut this end plumb in place. And at this end, I need to leave it long because I need that to figure out the back piece. Alright, it's a good chance to tell you what happened to this. If you watched the last video, you would have seen what happened, but I didn't really go into detail. It was all a little bit fresh, and I didn't realise just how close I came to losing my eye. I was using my doggy bar to pull out a nail up on a ladder over my head and slipped off the nail. I was wearing this pair of safety glasses. These two teeth here impacted right in front of my eye. So all this bruising is from the impact on my safety glasses. A little cut there from this piece here. This would have gone straight into my eye, no doubt about it. Wear your safety glasses, boys and girls. You don't get a second chance with your eyes. Now back to our scheduled programming. I'm going to fix this rail on temporarily. I just put one in each bracket initially. I've got my lines here that I marked earlier. Got my good rule with the angle finder on that joint. 159. Now because we're doing a mitre, we want to halve that. Alright, so what's that? 79.5 degrees. We can't cut that, and neither do we want to, because remember your drop saw cuts 90 degrees out from the edge of the timber, which is what we've measured here. So if we take 90 degrees off that, that gives us minus 10.5. Now the minus just refers to the direction of the cut. So let's cut two pieces at 10.5. I'll run this one long, and that one I'll run long as well. Where I want this junction is the mark I've got on the wall here, that X where I measured the angle. I just line up my ruler on that, slide it down. Doesn't need to be exactly perfect. But one thing that threw me and took me a while to figure out is getting the angle right. If you rotate that around until it runs along your cut nicely, that means it's in the right orientation. Very carefully get a clamp on here. Just recheck that. We good? There we go. That is pretty close to perfect. When we screw that together, we'll tighten that right up. The beauty of these screws, they're the ones we use for the windows as well, is that despite their size and the small head, they do pull together nicely. So that there, even with one screw, is reasonably solid. I will put a screw the other way once this is all glued together. This is where it gets tricky. So if I'd mark this side here, brackets would be at the wrong height, because you've got to remember that your brackets can't go right into the corner and your handrail is actually sitting out here. So what I need to do is get a piece of dowel that sits on top of these. Now at this point I can set up my bracket. Screw your bracket onto an offcut, sit it there underneath and screw it into your blocking or stud. Now the next bit threw me a little bit initially, so here I'm making a 90-ish degree cut. However, because it's a compound cut, I need to mark the top. And by the top, I mean where these two intersect, not the vertical top. Does that make sense? What we want to do is align it to this plane. So if you grab your square there and mark where it's intersecting there. As you see, it's slightly out from my vertical plane here. I just need to repeat the same process in here. Getting this piece right is honestly the hardest part of the whole process. A little bit hard to show on camera, but that looks basically centered. So the cuts are pretty good. It is a bit long as I expected, but the angle is perfect. So all I need to do is mark where I want the short point. I'll show you how to recut that. So the quick way of doing this is you run your piece to the blade, and you just rotate it so that it's lined up with the blade. You can even feel when it just slots in that sweet spot. Just make sure that you're not pushing on the blade and deflecting it. Then raise your blade and just slide it. Just keep the same plane there to your mark. Finally happy with those 3 pieces, so I'm going to go glue them together. It's going to look a little bit weird when I put it in. Pro tip, mark which corners go together. If I put this piece on the other end, I'm going to get to putting it in, it's not going to work. When you're gluing end grain, try to get some glue on both ends and spread it out and give it a chance to just soak in a little bit. I mean, I guess it applies to any joint, but when you're joining end grain, because it's more absorbent, more can go in. If the glue hasn't already partially absorbed in, then you end up with a weaker joint. Does that make sense? The top sorted, so the last cut I need to do is this end piece here. Could have cut this previously, but it's one of those cuts where you need to get the plane exactly right. It's easier just to do it for that circular saw. There's nothing particularly scientific about it. All I do is run my saw up, so I'm using this wall here as a guide. I'm using my fence to run along that by eye, and that brings the cut in slightly, but it's also plumb relative to the wall. There we go, done. So all I need to do now is give a few things a little sand and fill in the holes. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Thanks very much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in a couple of weeks. Cheers. This might be the last time I'm here, which is a little bit sad, but also happy. Oh, how good does that clouding look though?